Hello, I'm Temper Stance, and this is episode 1 of Temper Deck Teachings, a series that is geared towards learning the basics of the card game Genius Invocation TCG, a little side game, if you will, part of Genshin Impact's main game. In this first episode, we will discuss the basics of building a deck, as well as piloting some of the more rudimentary builds that you would be given in the beginning of the game, as well as what you would be limited with card choice wise. You'll find in this video 3 parts. The first part will be my explanation of deck building, and as well as covering the essentials of building a deck in Genius Invocation. And the other 2 parts will be 2 different games I played. The first one being raw, unedited footage of the starter deck that you first get whenever you pick up the game. And the second one will be gameplay of a second deck that's slightly modified from the original deck that I made myself. Okay, so I wanted to basically start off this deck building guide with a little bit of an example. I'll show you one of my decks I currently have. You have 3 character cards here that each have their specific usages. This is one of my personal decks. You have a set of cards that go with it, and of course, this is what you're probably asking, how do I put together one of these? By the way, you can see the card list if you ever want to in this fashion, so that it's a little bit easier to see everything that's part of the deck, all 30 cards. And you may be asking, how do I put together a deck that produces any kind of result that I would like? First, you would have to think about your win condition. You'd have to think about how does your deck intend on winning a game, a match. Basically produce a set of cards that would accommodate that win condition, having a variety of outs, as you will, so that if the opponent has a counter strategy to yours, you aren't completely locked in. Now, the game gives you a pretty decent starter on this, using Diluc and Kaya, as well as Fischl, who is particularly powerful here. Diluc being a Claymore Pyro user that, by the way, you can see all the elemental reactions that are capable with a certain element that you're talking about by clicking on the tool text here, or the card text here, giving you a tooltip. This combo as well with Kaya, which this is very much like what normal Genshin Impact's party building is like. You want an animo to make your reactions more consistent. You would want some kind of reaction between your elements that produce a powerful result. In this case, Kaya setting up Cryo and Sucrose being able to take the animo and swirling it to put 1 damage on all character cards, and putting Cryo on the other 2, although it removes Cryo because the reaction occurred on the original card. Keep that in mind. But Sucrose also, if you're even using which really you should be using her skill and not just the normal attack, her skill will forcibly switch the character to the previous character. Now, I have a bit of an acronym for this composition, not this one in particular, but a way to produce a composition that would be somewhat desirable, something that's a little bit more balanced and consistent, and that is SETS T, SETS-T, and it is very loosely based on Magic the Gathering's Bread, BREAD. Now, SETS T is synergy, equipment, talents, support, and tech. Even though there is no particular order in which you would have to establish this, I would strongly suggest prioritizing synergy, the top part of the acronym, first, and tech at the very last. Now let's just dive right into what all this entails. Now you have your synergy already. The game already provides you with a deck that can somewhat accomplish this. As I said, it's with Diluc, you can produce Melt with Kaya and produce it more more consistently with and that's really a consistent option already. You can, of course, whenever you pick up cards, for example, Fischl, which is very early in the game that you would get her, she produces a summon that is capable of producing electro damage, which if you decide to pair it with D-Luke, you'd be able to get overloaded, which would increase your damage output, as well as forcibly switch character, meaning that Sucrose is possibly able to go out. I wouldn't recommend taking Sucrose out if you're putting in Fischl. I would actually recommend, of all characters, either taking D-Luke or Kaya out to replace with Fischl. But nonetheless, she is very flexible in the way that you can have overloaded or superconduct from cryo if you went that route, each of which producing a somewhat similar result that you would be able to apply damage to a wider variety of your opponent's character cards without having to apply or go by their rules in a way. And of course, there are also Dendro combinations here, which are a little bit more complex. I may make a video about that later on creating a Dendro combo deck. But let's stick to the basics now. Now you may want to start off next part of the deck building with equipment. That's the E. There's synergy at the top here, and then equipment right afterwards. Now, we'll take a look here and see D-Luke is a Pyro Claymore, as I said. And so we'll just take a Claymore that you get at the beginning of the game, drop that in the deck, as well as an artifact that accompanies Pyro users, which is Scorching Hat. It just basically cheapens up the skills D-Luke uses, and that can be beneficial if you roll a particularly large amount of Pyro dice. Now keep in mind the artifacts don't actually do it multiple times. They only cheapen up the first usage of a skill or a talent if you ever get to that point. But it is still beneficial with D-Luke nonetheless. It's good to just spend less elemental dice in a turn regardless. Now these artifacts are in particular I'm fond of because they're particularly cheap. You may get the more expensive artifacts later down the road, like Emblem of Severed Fate, but I never really believed in that kind of stuff. I particularly like the more expensive weapons, the cheaper weapons being just good enough to get by on. Don't worry if you don't have these more expensive options, just work with what you do have. This game is pretty flexible in card choices. But moving on, you have Kaya here as a sword user, Cryo. So you'd want to drop in the sword that you get at the beginning of the game, and an artifact that matches. Broken Rhymes Echo does the same thing as Witch's Hat, just for Cryo. And these weapons all do the same thing as well. They only deal 1 extra damage, and actually all the weapons, regardless, do the same thing. Deal 1 extra damage, and they have some accompanying card text aside from that, but you don't have to worry about all that right now. And moving on, we have Sucrose, who is an Animo Catalyst user. We have a Catalyst here to start off the game with, and this would be the Animo artifact that would accompany it, which is heavily verbose in name. Same effect though, that's all you need to know. The original deck that you start off with will have a whole slew of different cards like the Weinstein Tricorn and Polearm and blah blah blah. I recommend you toss all that out and just start from scratch. Of course, if you bought cards. Now, I also recommend just playing around with that original deck to get yourself acquainted with the game, because you can get wins off that basic deck with a lot of the AI, because it can actually be, you're not going to use all these cards. Some of them are going to be thrown in to a tune some of your dice to match up the elements that you actually do need. For example, if you rolled, say, an hydro die, which could be played for a hydro character. Well, sad thing is, you do not have a hydro character at this stage. You only have Animo, Cryo, and Pyro. So that die would be useless. But if you had, say, for example, this white tassel you start off with, and you just have that lying around, you use it to attune to get that mana that you're looking for, that element that you're looking for. But once you start buying cards, generally that is kind of pointless to have a card that you can't actually use in the deck. I recommend throwing in a Sweet Madam, not necessarily a good card. I wouldn't recommend using this at later stages of the game, but it's good for right now when you are still buying cards. Things like that, like and actually what I'm gonna say there is leading back into that synergy, and that's the reason why I wanted to drop in like a Sweet Madame. I will actually leave this out to explain for later, but it's because you also lack a support character that can produce a shield, or a character that can actually heal, which Fiona is also a good healer too, because her summon will heal your character for 2 HP. You don't have any of that right now, so basically you're looking at cards that can produce all your healing. But getting back to it on topic, you're just sticking with your equipment. This is basically all you need for this. Don't worry about anything else until you actually are out of options. You have no other cards to throw in, so you have nothing else, and you may end up having to throw in like this random bow and use it for attunement fodder. But you should always be seeking to, whenever you have those cards that have no function in your deck, like the white tassel and the raven bow, which are only for polearm users and bow users respectively, or the wine-stained tricorn for hydro users, or so on and so forth. All these different artifacts that they give you at the beginning of the game, or worse off, Master of Weaponry here, which you have no way of actually using because not all your characters are different weapon types, or same logic as Blessing of the Divine Relics Installation, which you start off with. Again, it's just a card that has no use up for it until you actually you have more cards. But anyway, let's move. We'll skip talents for now, which that's the T in sets T, which these are talents. These are the cards that you're looking at. I'll quickly show you what I would be talking about. When you do get to that point when you are in need, keep this in mind, when you do get to that point that you would need talents, this is very powerful to have. For example, Diona here has a talent that allows you to use her skill. That's basically what like most of the talents in this game will do, is they'll use their elemental skill and make it more powerful for the rest of the game. For Official's case, Stellar Predator, you immediately use Knight Rider, and that's her skill here. And it'll make her normal attack more powerful, which does combo. Moving on, the second S in sets T, Support, you would have, well, support cards, which are typically capable of making or breaking a deck. You may have cards that work well with your skills, and sometimes they don't really do much at all, if anything. Now, the game provides you a copy with Dawn Winery already. I'd suggest keeping that in. A copy of Favonius Cathedral, that's a good card. You start off with an event card, which I decide to lump it in. I'm talking in a general sense, things that support uphold your decks, what your deck is trying to do. Now, this card, the Bestest Travel Companion, which I lovingly call Small Paimon because their cost is 2 here in this card. It provides you with 2 Omni Element with, for example, stray dice rolls, like your dice didn't roll quite favorably, and now you're stuck with, for example, that Hydro die, and that's odd, that would be used for a Hydro character, but you can't use anything in this deck with Hydro. So you play this card out, and you're able to convert it into something you can't use. The game also starts you off with what I call Big Paimon, which you pay out 3 like-colored elemental dice, which you can tell from this white die here. That means that you can only pay this card off with 3 dice of the same color, while this black die here in the corner represents the fact that you can pay anything for this color, for this card. Also why I would recommend straying away from the more expensive artifacts that contain the white die here. The ones that you could pay with anything really are more flexible. Same thing with weapons, except weapons have a much greater effect and are probably worth them out. You can also add in cards that would help you pay off that cost. At the stage of the game, you probably do not have much. So you're thinking, well, what do I add here? Because you have something that allows you to play it. You have your power in your deck here, the core parts of the deck. You have something that lets you function a little bit better. For example, this Dawn Winery lets you spend 1 less elemental die. That lets you switch to combo Kaya's cryo damage with Diluc's pyro damage within the same round, without having to spend that die. That would make it a little bit awkward to play out. At that same rate, you may want to maintain a copy of Leave It To Me. Does the same concept, except instead of making it cheaper, it'll make it faster. It'll make it a fast action, which means that you can play this before you can do something else in your action instead of a combat action, which means that you can play out Kaya on turn 1, deal his cryo damage, and then pass. And then your next turn, you'll play Leave It To Me, but then you'd be able to switch to Diluc on turn 2 and use his skill right off the bat without having to wait an extra turn and let your opponent basically act out their turn before you even get to use your stuff. Moving on, the game provides you a copy of Changing Shifts, which does the same thing as Dawn Winery here, except in a can. It lets you pay out 0 mana and do it once. It won't stick around. Dawn Winery will stick around a lot longer, but Changing Shifts lets you do it right now. That combo with Leave It To Me can produce just enough to get your power in. Now you also get a copy of When the Crane Returned, which basically bundles all this together and lets you, say, for example, use Frostnull here, which does cryo. And keep this in mind, if you use When the Crane Returned on a character that uses a skill here, you would actually switch to the right-hand side character card. So you use When the Crane Returns for 1 mana, Frostnull for 3 mana, and then you would switch over to Sucrose. So keep that in mind when you're actually composing your, or at least what character card you're on when you're using When the Crane Returned. That being said, also added, as I said, the Sweet Madame for the same reason why you'd be adding Favonius Cathedral because you have no healing otherwise in your 3 character cards. And you get a lot of different things like Star Signs, which gives you 1 energy for 2. That's easily replaced by some other cards that are in the game. I won't really go into depth on that quite yet. And you may want to get a copy of Strategize, which is Pot of Greed in this game, which lets you draw 2 cards for the price of 1 elemental die, which is very powerful. Honestly, any deck I would recommend running this card because it's very, very powerful. Other than that, really at this stage of the game, you probably wouldn't have much to have on offer until you actually start playing. So then we'd move on to, of course, Calx's arts, which I guess you would be able to add that in. What it does is it steals an energy from your characters so that you could be able to play your ultimates. Not very good, considering a lot of your cards really don't need that energy. Like D-Luke could probably use this. Like you use a skill on Kaya here and he produces 1 energy, which is this icon here. And then you move on to Sucrose, which produces 1 energy, and then you move on to D-Luke, and then you would use Calx's art. Like you would have 1 energy, you use Calx's art here, so you'd move at most 2 of your characters 1 energy from them to your active character, which would let you fill up D-Luke's requirements for his elemental burst. And then you would nuke your opponent for 8 pyro damage just using a card combo. Not necessarily consistent, but good enough to fit the bill for right now. But at the same time, that brings us to the next part, which would be tech, which is basically all other cards that would be added to your deck for whatever reason. You have a core deck here that kind of functions more or less on a win condition, which our win condition in this game is producing cryo damage with Kaya, swirling it with the Anmo from Sucrose to get damage on all opponents, so it kind of lowers them down. And then being able to nuke using the melt reaction for +2 damage. Being able to nuke an opponent for, say, 5 damage or 10 damage. Which would, if they were able to do 10 damage, you would straight up destroy a character card, so that satisfies a win condition. You basically do that 3 times. And all the rest of the deck is making sure that you're able to do that 3 times. But you may notice at your current state that you really don't have anything else other than some stuff. And that's where tech comes in. You just basically think of what your opponent is doing and basically fill in cards that stop your opponent from being able to do that. That would be cards like Send Off, which you actually start off a game with 1 copy of this. This allows you to choose 1 summon and make it lose 2 usages. A summon being something that comes off the effect of a card, like Large Wind Spirit here from Sucrose. This is a summon that deals 2 ammo damage every time you end your round. Not your turn, but your round, when you press that button right over here. And it can do it 3 times. If your opponent is running a Sucrose, and let's say you want to stop them from using this Large Wind Spirit, you would play a copy of Send Off here, which would allow you to straight up destroy it if you are targeting that one in particular, and it has 2 usages left. Now you may want to stop your opponent from doing the same to you, and that's why you would add Quick Knit to give your Large Wind Spirit 1 more usage, which it has a maximum. This usage here, when it says 3, Out of the cards that you do have, let me see if I remember which ones that you start off with. You're basically looking to add in cards that, for example, I haven't lost yet here. Only playable if when your character's defeat this round, which is very rare. Like, you're actually playing this card and it's not towards the end of a turn, or I should say a round, and you produce one Omni element and one energy. Not beneficial necessarily, but at this stage when you're probably losing your cards, this can come in handy in a clutch moment. And there is counter synergy with Guardian's Oath here, because your large wind spirit may actually be destroyed in the process here, but you have so few summons. Honestly, it may be worthwhile. I wouldn't recommend running this all times because that 4 elemental die cost is a little bit too heavy. I'd recommend first replacing this card if you're ever going to replace any of the cards for something more useful. But it is basically it. You know, all the other cards in this deck, you basically just add whatever you have lying around. Which, I believe the game gives you 1 copy of Master Weaponry, 1 copy of Blessing of the Divine Rocks Installation. It gives you 1 copy of all these different artifacts here. And a copy of these weapons. I believe it starts you off with a Mondstadt Hash Brown as well. If I'm not right on that, don't worry. It's going to be rectified very quickly. So basically what you're looking at is these cards that were excess, the junk cards like this pole arm, the bow, these artifacts that aren't aligned with the elements. All you're doing whenever you are purchasing cards using this currency, the lucky coin, as you use them, you'll want to buy cards. The cat will let you view the card shop's commodities, and you'll see that I've already bought some that ended up out down here. There's some that you may not see, like Engulfing Lightning here, or Exile Circlet, or like the NRE, or you may see cards like Abyssal Summons that you have no real use of getting in anyway, or cards that you may be tempted to use like Wind and Freedom, but honestly you may want to worry about that later when you have a more consistent deck to work with. I would recommend picking up, first of all, cards that let you do what you do more consistently, like Knights of Favonius Library. I'd recommend picking up this card first, and matter of fact 2 copies of it, just taking them and slotting them out, taking cards that you can't use out and putting cards that you can use in. For example, let's just start left from right, take this bow out and add in your 2 copies, like take the pole arm out as well, add 2 copies of Favonius Library. I'd take out the artifacts that you can't use and just basically double up on those core cards, those 17 cards I showed you at the very beginning, that whenever some of them you have to actually complete the some cards you have to actually complete the player's manual here to get through. You can see I myself am not actually particularly far into it, but you're just, as you get farther in, you start getting more powerful cards, like the 2nd copy of the bestest travel companion ever, and you would just Well, you just take this and add another copy in. If you decide to switch out a character card like Fischl, for example, you want to trade out D-Luke for Fischl, then you would start adding in, you would take out D-Luke's artifact and the weapon and add in the bow and the electro artifact to make sure that you can actually use Fischl. But to keep it simple, we'll only use the cards that are basic so that you can have something to go off of here. And I'll show you a game later. Of course, you would also want a copy of a card like, you can get Timmy here, which is cheap. Honestly, I think Timmy is a little slow. You probably will want, when you get to him, Chang the Ninth, which is a lot more consistent. And it's if either side uses a skill, which can actually work out quite consistently and lets you draw more cards. This gives you the Omni element, but honestly, that's irrelevant if you have cards like Knights of Favonius Library. I'd recommend taking out cards, of course, cards that are duds, and adding in more cards that you can use. When you get around to it, if you have excess lucky coins, I would recommend buying upgrades to your weapons. This deals 1 damage, which can do in a pinch, honestly. But you may want to sub that out for example, the sacrificial cards in general, like sacrificial fragments, sacrificial bow, sacrificial greatsword, and sacrificial sword, and there's a polearm that does that as well. And all they do is, after you use a skill, it gives you 1 elemental die of the same type as your character, which allows you to basically do more things in a turn. And you can use that die sometimes to do nothing, and sometimes that die just lets you switch, but sometimes that die may add up and make you able to use that extra Searing Onslaught, which gets you to that +2 damage. Very powerful with D-Luke. I would look at the other cards that you have in your shop, like Ellen, which you get 1 copy from defeating Ellen in a battle. But in this particular deck, because you're likely to be using multiple times of Searing Onslaught, or I would prefer you be using more times of Astable Animo Hypostasis Creation, 6-308. The skill from Sucrose, you probably are going to be using that a lot too. So in this case, honestly, Ellen might be working out. A matter of fact, that does in fact combo with the effects of the artifact. So once per turn means that this will actually cost only 1 die. If you, well, actually it won't, because the first time you use it, it'll be the artifact that triggers. Let me scratch that. I'm giving you bad information here. So the first time it triggers, it'll be reduced by 1 for the artifact, and the second time you trigger it, because it will be already used, spend 1 less die on the second time it uses it, so you'll be able to get, for example, on D-Luke here, 2 costed Searing Onslaughts twice in a turn, and the third one, you can cheapen up. Flowing Flame lets you do exactly what I just described, being able to use that 1 less pyro die, which would, after, give you that third time of 1 less, which would be 2, 4, 6 mana instead of 7. You could add that into the deck if you so desired. You could add Sucrose's talent. I honestly don't really recommend using Kaya's talent because it just isn't that powerful. Try it if you think so. If you want to just try it for yourself, go right ahead. I never saw it as powerful. I, matter of fact, never even tried it because I just switched decks altogether, but go ahead. And you're just going down the line like this, just subbing out each card until you, like, another big card I would recommend getting is Lewa Harbor Wharf. And Catherine here, which Lewa Harbor Wharf lets you draw cards at each turn more than you would normally. and Catherine lets you make fast. It is a cheaper version of, or I should say, it's a more consistent version of Leave It to Me, which Catherine's able to allow you to do it multiple times. And of course, as you start subbing in more powerful weapons, like Sacrificial Greatsword here, just drop that in, and the Sacrificial, oh, let me pick it up. Sacrificial Sword here, you may notice that all of them cost 3, a little bit more expensive. You may think, I should probably look at ways of cheaping that up too. And so you'd add cards like Wagner, that then you take out, honestly, I wouldn't even recommend running Guardian's Oath unless you're playing against the Rodeo of Locke, the Oceanid, the Water Oceanid Adventure Challenge, which you can access at some point. If you recognize this character card, then you know what I mean. It produces the Mimic Summons, which you can then wipe with Guardian's Oath. But aside from that, honestly, you probably just chuck it and do it with it. Same thing for Master Weaponry and that card. And you probably want to add more. Matter of fact, if you're going to be using anything, you're probably better off using Send Off 2 copies of that instead of Guardian's Oath. But then you would want another copy of Strategize. That's very powerful. You may want to toss in a card like that you pick up, like Wagner. If you find yourself using these weapons, and I won't argue against it, but like you can add in a second Wagner to increase your chances of draw. That's basically what you do. Whenever you add 2 copies of a card, you double its chances of being drawn. Same thing with Timaeus here. If you follow the philosophy of having those bigger artifacts, lets you pay it off. Some of these more niche cards like Chain to Ninth here, which lets you do what Timmy does, but better in a sense. Or this card that lets you, every time a summon is off the field, like you use a summon entirely, either they destroy it or you use all of its charges. And this goes for both sides, so if you destroy their summons too, the same thing happens. And this cheapens it up a little bit more. Has the same effect as Wagner, except Wagner is a lot more value-oriented late-game stuff. You may want to pick up Rana, which has the same effect as the Sacrificial Weapons, except it gives you the elemental die of the next character in slot, which is good for if you're switching characters, or you have ways of making do with what you have. You just want to basically be pulling cards off that you don't think would have any use and adding in cards that you think you would be used. Now, you also probably should learn about how your cards are played out. For example, this version of Paimon, the actual Paimon, not the Bestest Traveling Companion, small Paimon. Big Paimon here is a late game card, so you want to get that out of your starting hand. Changing Shifts can work out early game. You, of course, I haven't lost yet is a very late game card, as well as Send Off. Those are cards that generally you want to see in the late game, not the early game, but I can make use of Changing Shifts somewhat early. So we'll keep that as well as the other Paimon for mana fixing. I got somewhat lucky with Broken Rhymes Echo coming out, Weinstein Shrine Corn, and Mask of Solitude Assault being dud cards, so I'm glad that I got at least that. And because this is the Cryo card, I'm just going to start off with Kaya here.
Ready when you are.
Now this starts the roll phase or gameplay, which a lot of people I see complain a lot about the RNG in it. When you get cards like Knights of Favonius Library, you're probably looking at being able to mulligan these a lot more aggressively. But you may notice I see the Animo die here, which I have. I have one Omni die, But other than that, nothing else that I can actually use. It's all Hydro, Electro, and Geo and Dendro here. Nothing I can use. When you start out, you probably want to keep this, like these small scraps here, to solidify your chances. When you get a card like Knights of Favonius Library, you can mulligan them more aggressively, just toss it. You could throw it to the wind and see you'd be rolling hard for that cryo energy. But because I don't have that card yet, I'm going to be a little bit more modest and just roll these. See, I got one Animo here, or not one Animo, I got an Omni off that, and 2 Pyro, which is good for this, but honestly not so great for actually using what we selected here, the first one, starting off Kaya. But thankfully this game is a little bit more flexible. These cards that normally I would see as trash become treasure as I just convert them all into attunement. Now I could use this card, Bestest Travel Companion ever. Well, actually it's just Bestest Travel Companion. It's very tricky with its wording, but I wouldn't recommend using that until you're pressured to, because these cards, well, basically are just, I already know they're not going to be used, so might as well use them. Now let's think about this. So if I use it right now, the skill, I would take up my Omni Elements, which honestly does not matter, but this may seem like heresy, but I'm actually going to convert the Animo right here instead of these 2 Electro, because I want to pay off the Broken Rhymes Echo with light-colored dice, which otherwise would require me to use the Omni Elements. So I'm going to attune the Animo to pay that off. Broken Rhymes Echo, equip. This is a long-term investment. Using the 2 Electro to put that down. And just doing that.
Cool it.
It actually does play out because because changing shifts means that I could switch and I would be able to play the Animo off of the Omni die and playing Paimon, but not a good recommend. So I don't need this because I'm going to be playing for tempo here. So I'm going to switch.
Let's go.
To D-Luke here. And just applying Pyro like that. Now my next turn I'm probably looking using Sucrose to like spread that Pyro onto Chongyun here to get Melt reaction off of that crowd that's already on him. So keep that in mind. They ended their turn first. So I'm gonna go second, unfortunate, but not likely to actually be as impactful. I may end up having to use the bigger Paimon in this case. That looks like I could use. That makes me think I should stick around with D-Luke here, but because my plan is to use Sucrose, of course you'd throw out all your unneeded elements, and if I were to be riskier, I'd throw out one of these Pyro dice, because I have a 2/7 chance of seeing it come back. But also I have this card that can help me support, as well as this card which I could throw away to tune, or actually might be better, like from the state of things I think it would be better to keep Paimon, but Quick I would clearly be throwing out to attune first, because I don't see use of Quick Knit coming out more than Paimon here in this case. But I could see the argument against that because Paimon is a trickier card to lay out. It's just this, I feel like my next turns are going to be slower. Of course, you always want to play to win as well, so that's why I'm also going to be throwing out the second pyro dice, that second pyro die. Because I have 2 and I could attune with 1, so I'm just going to throw it and see if I can get Animo off this roll. And it looks like it paid off. Oh, looks like they set it up for me anyway. So, that being said, I will just, like normal, just Searing Onslaught.
Forth, my blade!
And, I could use this to just deal chip damage here, so honestly, I think that may be the option here. Just, these two mixed with this, the junk dice, if you will, with this Omni to produce that. But then I would switch and be ending my turn on lower tempo. An alternative play I could do is switch to Sucrose here. He has 3 elemental dice left, which means that he can just hit for another go here. If you were to switch, you wouldn't be able to play anything else. Always keeping in mind your opponent's elemental dice levels, which can be seen here. Yours will be shown to the opponent as well. They don't know what types you have, but they'll always know how many dice you have. So, because I can infer that since there is no way of them actually switching, I can assume they're either going to use a skill for Chongyun here, or if I killed Chongyun, like, for example, using this, I could force him to use some of his cards to attune to actually get a use out of Razor or Noel. If he were to use Razor, it would mostly... It's always possible that it just conveniently adds up to all the right things, and this may be playing into the turn, but it's just not very likely. And those 2 Animo won't actually be coming into use in this specific case. That being said, I think just use this. Probably gonna switch to Razor here and then try to hit with an attunement both. Oh!
Where did
there
I
we go.
wrong?
So I'll be switching to, matter of fact, Sucrose here next.
I can do it.
Which may not seem like a particularly strong option, considering I can nuke with Kaya to produce a melt reaction and get that damage boost, but I want to spread the pyro because my current pyro user has been defeated. Plus, nothing can go really wrong with Sucrose's ability. I have 2 dice left over. I could make a tempo play here of absolutely nothing, actually, because I have nothing to play. But let's say, for example, if I had a 2-costed card, I would be able to play it, use the last 2 dice, and make a tempo play. I'll make a video about tempo later, and produce something that'll stick on the field. But since I have nothing else, I'm just going to end turn to go first next. They'll do likewise. They have no mana left over. They have no energy. Good news is this means that I can hard roll out these pyro dice as well. I'll keep around the cryo in case I need to use Kaya later on. Cryo and Animo. And I have plenty of attunement fodder down here as well. So what I'm looking at is basically
Animo test 6308.
chipping away at their health. Good to get Noel forced out too. because he may have had a swing turn in that. Question is, do I care about attuning heavily to get a second go off of that? Not particularly. I could use both of these cards. And honestly, this has no value. I'd just leave it to me here, which is obviously what I'm going to play, so I'm going to do that. Switch over to Kaya.
This will be interesting.
It doesn't cost me my turn because I still am able to do that. It doesn't actually matter that I spent the dice because I only have 4 mana. I can only do so many things in a turn anyway. So just basically nuking down.
Dodge this!
Now it's possible I could have also played Paimon by saving up that at the turn. And actually I could say that I misplayed. I probably should have played Changing Shifts to save that one elemental die and then played Paimon by attuning it with a card and then playing Paimon, but not necessarily like that strong. I don't think it'll do me in, that's what I mean. You can see they had it in their face anyway. Now a couple of dud cards here. What I'm looking to do is probably roll for Kaya's Elemental Burst. And there's nothing in my hand that I could really use otherwise. So basically just normal rolls, just roll whatever isn't according to my elements I have. Good news is I have plenty of attunement fodder, as I said, with this deck, so just start chucking it all.
This moment will be frozen in time.
Steady as stone.
And I could switch 3. Not necessarily as strong, honestly.
I want to help.
That does minimal, but it does wear out the shield. Basically we're getting rid of, I get rid of this card, the weakest link. As if I
Absorption test.
get rid of that shield, put Razor out so that he's forced to use them, which is kind of weak. But of course since I'm going second, I might as well use this advantage to put out my stronger card so that I don't end up hitting with that supercharge. Always keep in mind what your opponent can do. This electro damage will produce, I should say, superconduct, which when it's dealing 4 plus that 1, 5, it would straight nuke. So I want to
Ready when
switch
you
back. It deals damage. That's almost negligible in this case. But we're gonna end round on that. I doubt that Kaya's making it out of this. So I should probably throw this cryo die out for Animo. Nukes.
This
And
doesn't look
I clear out
good.
with their effect.
Lupica! My Lupica!
And of course, just collapse on the finish line. I'll even show you the effect of the suit.
Animal hypostasis
I should say
emulation.
the elemental burst.
They still need me.
And would you look at that? We achieved a victory with the basic deck. Let me show you this deck list here. Having only one copy of Fischl's talent. And you'll see cards you may not have seen before, like Iron Tongue Tien. Check your lineup. You're working with a Pyro. This card is a weird mixture, doesn't do much direct damage, but also provides a bit more flexibility with the types of damage, cryo and animo. Of course, working together in tandem. Mona here, which combos with the cryo, the freeze, and of course vaporize from the pyro here. So we'll just hop right in, see what we can do. If this ends up as a loss, I'm gonna be able to explain exactly why I lost too. This is a late game card. Even though it's a bow, it's still, I'm not usually looking to start off with Fischl. Plus, I would want to draw her talent first before I ever use this bow. The sacrificial sword is good for early game, as is Wagner. You want to throw out the card draw, you probably want something that you want to draw that's more effective than something that draw into something that's more effective. Same thing with Plunging Strike, which is just beneficial with the talent card for Fischl. Although that can work in a pinch, I just wouldn't recommend having it in your starting hand. These two are early game cards you want to keep for your starting hand. It's unfortunate I draw the second Wagner, but honestly not as
This will be
devastating,
interesting.
because as I said, it's just, at least as a function, it's good to get them in the early game. These are somewhat lucky rolls. I don't have a Knights of Phonies library out yet, so I'm just going to be more modest with my rolls. I'm going to keep the animo. Now I may be tempted to use this card straight off the bat. Actually, with Iron Tongue Tien there, might have more use. So actually, I will use this card for attuning cryo. I don't mean attune cryo. I mean like that would probably be a huge misplay to attune using this card when you can just as easily use it for its actual effect. That'd be awkward. But anyway, use this. And I could honestly use the Electro 1, 2, 3. And I would have to attune using this, but because it's 3, 6, and it would have an awkward time of using Sucrose here, even though I got. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll do it. I'll do it. It'll produce a swing turn. possibly in the future. Now attune using actually the second Wagner. So I already used one of the weapons, so Wagner is not as critical.
Dodge this!
It's not very typical that I usually would wait out to play out the Wagner before I play the sword for a slower turn, but because of circumstances, I'm just more aggressive.
Leaving so soon?
And of course, follow it up with a little bit of extra damage. And end turn. That's what we call tempo there, when you're using up all of your resources in a turn to maximize output. Because honestly, I don't want to use Electro because I have no plans of using Official at the state. It's more likely that I'm gonna solo with Kaya, so I'd throw out that elemental die for Animo. I have just as much chance of re-rolling it. And getting that, what I want is the secondary. I want to hit with Kaya again, maximize what I invested. What I could also do is use one of these Iron Tongue Tians to attune for his ultimate, which honestly looks pretty good right now. Let's see here, I'd be using 3 to play on Official, Burst, which would be 7, and I'd switch to Official probably after that. Or maybe I'd switch to Sucrose, never mind, so yeah. So I played this out, using the whatever cards I have on offer. Attune using this guy. Thinking about if I wanted to attune using Wagner, but I really don't. I can still get value out of Wagner. Attune using him.
This moment will be frozen in time.
I don't get the effect off that sacrificial sword using my burst, but it does.
I want to help.
Prep for a lot of work. And I have nothing else to play, so I'll just end turn. I get to go first because I played out tempo wise. May look spooky with all these cards out in play, but a lot of them are kind of passive. Timmy and Lieben here not really having much of an effect until later. Also, misplay by the AI. It should have summoned the Cryons before the Animo because it would have swirled. Of course, we're gonna chuck all the. Hang on. Let's see what cards I drew. Yeah, nothing that powerful, so I'm gonna just toss all the cards except for what's Animo. I mean, all the dice except for what is Animo. I didn't get a necessarily lucky roll in that. That's fine. There's a card I'm gonna attune with. It's always Iron Tongue Tien because that's the weak link. That being said, I'm gonna have to attune using 2. Oh no, actually just one of them. So play out Wagner using the Pyro dice. It's smart and it knows that you want to use the Pyro dice, but not say for example like a Hydro and Omni or any of your Animo. Sometimes you have to guide it to use the dice that you want because it doesn't think about what you're going to play. It's not smart like that, but it can detect like you have no Pyro characters, so you probably want to use the Pyro dice to play these cards. Play when the crane returned for efficient usage here. And attune using this guy to get Animo, which will swirl, spread the damage, switch a character forcibly so he can't get that burst out without being more efficient. Switches to her, damage, and then I can nuke next turn if he doesn't. Well, that was actually a misplay. You should have switched to the card here at the center. Unless he's revealing that his dice is more Hydra than anything. I have nothing else I can really do unless I wanted to use up this ultimate by switching to Kaya and setting up for another turn. But from the looks of the state of things, I want Superconduct to go off anyway. And it's probably better with this not getting hit by Swirl, this Pyro or the Cryo. And so I will end turn and, well, I could... The worst that you can do is actually do 1 damage and freeze, which would immediately be wiped off at the end of the turn. So honestly, yeah, I would end turn on that.
Let me scry.
Okay. That was the more beneficial. All your things are wiped off now. Good timing, Knights of Favonius, or the Favonius Cathedral. I see 2 Cryo. I don't have the library out yet, so I'm going to keep the Cryo. And be a little bit more modest with my roll. I will play out the bow because it's all I have right now. But, in a sense, I'm just looking at a lot of, like a whole lot of,
I want to help.
like just making use of what I have.
Decided by destiny.
How much dice does he have? May not be worthwhile to switch because it would switch out like that. But thankfully, I also have when the crane return. But that would actually switch to official anyway, which would actually end up being a little bit less efficient to begin with. You'll see that the this burst would actually kill as well, and so that's why I also want to maintain that philosophy of not switching to official, because I want the
Stand clear.
big hits on Sucrose at the moment.
Need to make adjustments.
Let's see here.
In the name of the Prinzessin.
And that's all I can really do right now. I could tempo out when the crane returns, which honestly sounds like a good idea right now. Playing this right now, it will last over the turn, and I'll just hold on that. And there's the Knights of Favonia's library. So I'm looking for just enough to play out the skill from Fischl. And that looks like kind of a dud, so I'm going to re-roll this stuff actually first. You want to re-roll first because you want to check, see what you have available before you make any plays. And of course, get this in.
Oz, reveal thyself.
We'll switch to Kaya. Very unlucky that he only had the one. That's actually very lucky that you didn't have enough to attune to get. What we should have done is gone for Prowl, but whatever. That was a misplay. Don't worry, we'll make good advance. We're good. Matter of fact, I misplayed it itself too because I should have played out Rana to begin with, just normally.
You can't run from death.
As I said, if I lose this game, you'll get to know exactly why. That was specifically why I would say that it was misplayed to play use Rana for attunement. Was because I was distracted for a moment, but what I could have done is played out Rana, played the skill. Actually, I wouldn't have been able to play the skill if I hadn't played Rana. So, ergo, I did not misplay. Don't worry about it. That never happened. Everything's dandy in this neighborhood. It's unfortunate that I'm not able to show you off the power of Knights of Favonia's library. But basically what I'm able to do is mulligan my dice, like re-roll them in a way that gives me more chances to get what I want out of the dice rolls.
Cool it.
Don't worry about your health totals from drawing a little bit low, as long as you are away from, if you're not dead, that's good enough. Health is a resource. If you can take a hit on a character, you probably should. But all in all, that's the name of the game. Showing you just kind of like a scaled up power level of that basic deck that you'd start out with. And let me show you the deck that I normally run with here, so you can, if you want to, you can copy it. I think I already showed you it, but I'll show you it again. Just showing you that Fischl Diona lets you have healing. That's why it doesn't have, like, basically all the mechanics that are found in the cards of that last deck are found in the effects of these other cards. I'm not really big on Venti's Elemental Burst, but it's okay when in a pinch. Mostly it focuses on using Diona's Drunken Mist here for a lot of swing turns. Be able to like start from a lower position and swing back up to a power, like having the upper hand over your opponent. Of course, these shields are very good to survive, like add survivability to your deck. Her talent card will allow you to boost your shield, and that's if you have Broken Rhymes Echo already in play. That's going to be costed 3. Very good whenever you have her out. I typically, matter of fact, I start the match off usually with Diona, and the only time I would consider starting off with Fischl is if her talent cards are out, and I have quite a bit of setup for Fischl here. I usually never switch out, like I never go with Venti first. That's pretty typical for your Animo characters. You don't want them having, you don't want to have them out first. You want them to follow up after a card like this, and you swirl it, or like your damage dealer here. It focuses, it sets up quite nicely like a typical RPG party. You have your support character, your healer in a way, your damage dealer, and your another support here that basically just fills in the gaps where the others aren't. Matter of fact, you could say even Diona is like a cleric almost, a tank a little bit, and Venti is the support. But you'll notice the same concept as before. Iron Tongue Tien is a little bit more powerful in this deck because I don't need cards that help me switch out as often with Venti. Being able to cheapen up switching. A lot of it is focused on the power of Catherine, being able to switch mid-turn to get flexibility. There are actually quite a lot of summons in this deck. The Storm Zone does not count as a summon, that's actually an effect. Storm Eye, however, is also a summon. Diona is a summon, like a card. Diona is a card that has a summon here. And Oz is considered a summon. That will synergize well with this card. That will cheapen up your artifacts and your weapons here, which explains why I don't actually run Wagner. It's not as efficient as Wagner because Wagner is a more value-oriented card, but this card lets you play a lot more aggressively than Wagner would. Wagner requiring 2 dice, this is basically getting it for free. You don't get the full weapon discounted, but at the same time, it's very flexible. Whenever you're able, it's very flexible in the way that you can discount an entire artifact. Pay only 1 mana for a weapon, which by the way, all 3 of these are bow users. So I don't really have a struggle with if I draw a weapon whatsoever, it's gonna have value to it no matter who I'm playing with. Ironically, I don't actually run Master of Weaponry. I thought about that for the memes, having only 1 bow and switching it between like amongst all 3 characters. Turns out that does not work out nearly as powerful as you may think it would. Instead, I carry 2 sacrificial bows and 1 elegy for the end, of course, for Fischl. If I'm in a pinch, the elegy for the end can go on Diona, or even Venti. And the sacrificial bows, if I'm playing them out, typically are favored for Diona, which would be like, because I'd be using her skill quite a bit. And Venti would be the second option. Sometimes, some games I just straight up never play Venti, and I end up always switch between Diona and Fischl. But, same thing for Emblem of Severed Fates. You could easily put that in if you really wanted to on Venti here. And that provides a little bit of chip damage. If you're playing against live players and you are playing against a lot of summons, or for example, if someone ends up, I don't know if this ends up becoming similar to the metagame where there are a lot of summons in In the decks that you're playing against, I would definitely consider running a copy of Send Off. When the Crane Return typically is a mid-game card, like a card you play in around the middle of the game for a lot of these other decks. But for this deck, this is actually a pretty early game because you want to switch those cards pretty quickly. That being said, though, if there's a card that I'd be throwing out, it would be Iron Tongue Tien or When the Crane Returned, and you would most likely Iron Tongue Tien because it's similar in cost, and you would swap in a Send Off for countering other decks, just be able to have a tool against them. Or if I wouldn't ever recommend running Guardian's Oath, even though it wipes the board and it is pretty costly. If you're running in a meta game or you're playing against the Oceanid right here, if you're playing into a very heavily like a summon heavy meta game, it may actually be worthwhile running Guardian's Oath, even though it counters some of the synergy of your own deck with these. The good news is that as long as you're not playing it on Diona's Drunken Mist or Venti's Storm Eye, Official's Oz is actually fairly easy to get back out and like put back onto the board, and it would at the very least combo with this card. But overall, I would not recommend running Guardian's Oath. It's just if you're pressured to, because when in a pinch, like Send Off tends to be a lot more powerful. And matter of fact, you may even get away with that with the Oceanid battle, because you would just be able to outpace their damage with Diona's healing and shields, comboing with Fischl's damage here, and Venti could provide you a little bit of chip damage here and there. Do not underestimate the power of Stellar Predator. If there's this talent, it does not stack. Very easy, like it will give you that extra point, but honestly it's not as necessary. If there's a card that I would actually use for attunement fodder if I were to draw it twice, it would be this talent. Stellar Predator, I would easily be able to play out twice, and it would actually nuke. It would use both charges of Oz, so you would deal 2 electro damage on top of the 2 physical damage from a normal attack from using the Stellar Predator. And all in all, you would just be capable of doing a lot more with cards like Plunging Strike, which would combo efficiently with different dice, because you wouldn't be able to worry about having all the dice you need. You can immediately switch, use the effects, and have a tempo swing. Some cards you may consider running in this deck would be like Treasure Seeky Ceiling. If you have Favonius Library, there's probably not much of a reason to be running Toss Up. Matter of fact, Toss Up is basically one of those weird cards where it seems nice, but if you're playing either a deck that if you're already playing a deck that has only one type of element to it, you would probably want to be running, for example, cards like these, like the Elemental Resonance cards, to get your mana efficiently. And if you are Or like if you're running Inazuman cards, Thunder Eternity would still work out a little bit more efficiently than having some of those other cards. All in all, I hope you learned something from all of this and are now able to more consistently see results in your deck building experience in this game.